Oi, oi, it's your boy, the something funny and rhyming of shitting all over PFL's poorly planned pay-per-view, Jack Slack, and that's our plan today. I've been off for a few days because I went travelling for a little bit, and obviously when I go on a plane, I immediately get whoever's got the weakest immune system, they pass on their shit to me, because I have an even weaker immune system. So I've got a bit of a sore throat. I'm sorry, I know you come here for effete English snark, but today you're going to have to put up with an English Barry White. Which is clearly what I sound like. What did we miss? We missed a couple of, a dog shit UFC event. It was a dog shit UFC event when they had Derek Lewis as the main event. And then that fell through. And Kennedy and Nzechukwu headlined a UFC card in a 3-rounder. Fucking hilarious. Which is even funnier because I just made a Zabit video where I said he headlined the only 3-round UFC main event in a decade or whatever it was. It was the first one since 2011, but the comments were naturally full of people being like, actually, just this weekend. And they were correct, technically correct. The best kind of correct. So I think we'll circle back to like stuff that was on that card. I'd rather talk about this PFL event because it's really fucking funny. ESPN has been pushing PFL so hard. Actual MMA websites are ranking Kayla Harrison when she doesn't have a division. I think Ariel had her at like number 5 pound for pound or something like that, because she's the only Ali Abdulaziz fighter who goes on his show. But she fumbled the bag in another $1 million payday. But I mean, she's getting like $500,000 a fight allegedly. But the whole point is, this PFL championship card, it was supposed to be night of $6 million or whatever it was, because they had 6 tournaments wrapping up. Women's lightweight, featherweight, heavyweight, lightweight, welterweight, and light heavyweight. No middleweight. Weird. But they had 6 tournaments wrapping up, and there was $1 million prize for each tournament winner. And the PFL decided, doing zero market research, they were like, well, this is a pretty big event for us. Let's make it pay-per-view. And then they announced the pay-per-view price, and where they could have done $5, $10, they went for $50, which was mental. You didn't need to do market research. Everyone who's really plugged into MMA, or like Ariel Helwani put up a poll saying, are you going to buy this event? I think there was something like 3% of people said yes and 97% of people said no. And he's quite, people who are following MMA, probably in that circle with the Ariel Helwani listenership. So if you're getting 97% of hardcores saying no, chances are you're not going to do well selling this pay-per-view. Made worse by the fact that, made better for me, but made worse by the fact that it's for free on Channel 4 because they only decided at the last minute this was going to be a pay-per-view. So Channel 4 in the UK shows the PFL events. It turns out I could watch it on 4OD, but 4OD's shit. They play like 5 ads every 10 minutes, which I believe is just normal for US TV, but luckily, Channel 4 also uploaded the entire event onto their YouTube channel, where you can go and you can use a VPN if you're not in England, and you can use AdBlock. So that was the night of, they uploaded that, after the event happened. Absolutely bonkers. If you were American, you could have just put your VPN on and checked out what was happening 10 minutes after the fights happened. I don't think anyone was dying to know live what happened with Kayla Harrison, unless he had a ton of money bet on it. So absolutely baffling decision-making, but I just want to reiterate, PFL are World Series of Fights, WSOF, but they're also sort of not, because they did a New Year's Eve event in Madison Square Garden, the one night of year where everyone, including fight fans who have wives, has somewhere better to be. They put on an event there, and that was a financial disaster for them, as predicted by everyone who saw it, saw the news that it was going to happen. And then they promptly changed their name to PFL, rebranded the entire thing, claimed it was like a brand new organisation, even though it was still Ray Safo and Ali Abdulaziz and all the same clowns. And they eventually got the ESPN deal. But it was very funny, this card especially, because I think it's Sean McConnell or Sean O'Connell. What's his name? Fuck. He was in the UFC for a while, but he was in WEC. But he was on commentary. He's pretty good. And so was Randy Couture and Kenny Florian. But he started saying this is Marlon Moraes' return to PFL. But he had to stop himself and then really be like, Marlon Moraes, of course, he fought in WSOF. Nothing to do with PFL. I need to get a sound clip of Alan Partridge saying, "They've rebadged it, you fool." But yeah, last time they had a terrible idea that bombed, they just rebranded. Maybe they do that this time. Because I'm just thinking, they've got the ESPN deal, so maybe they're running this particular event at a loss. But I cannot see them getting $6 million, plus the fighters' purses, plus the cost of the arena and the overheads and stuff, back on this event. But anyway, maybe it wouldn't have been disastrous if Kayla Harrison had done what she was supposed to do and win, but she didn't. She fought a lass she'd beaten twice already and lost, which was fairly impressive. Now, Larissa Pacheco actually lost a fight in the UFC to Jessica Andrade, got guillotine choked in round 1, which was way back. When was that? 2014, so Andrade was still fighting as a bantamweight. But yes, this massive lady has lost to one of the smallest women on the UFC roster. But she has had, she's turned it around in recent years, and in her last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 before this, she'd won all the fights in the first round, which, never actually a sign of a turnaround, because if you smash everyone in one round and then lose when you meet someone who's actually competent, like Kayla Harrison, that's not really a tell. But then she came in against this Kayla Harrison fight, and she did, good work. She did enough to win the decision. I think it's good that she won the decision. It was close. I'm not going to say that it wasn't. It could have gone either way, to be honest. But it largely hinged around the fact that Kayla Harrison wasn't doing any damage from top position, and Larissa Pacheco was just hammer-fisting away. I mean, she did well avoiding bottom position quite a lot, and there were quite a few occasions where Kayla Harrison just shot really bad takedowns, and Pacheco got on her back. But I saw some people saying, like, Kayla Harrison is severely limited by the lack of elbows. Elbows are illegal in PFL because they have to fight so many times in quick succession. If you get a big, nasty cut, you might be healthy otherwise, but they won't. The commissions won't clear you if you've got a big cut from a previous fight that is likely to open again. So it kind of makes sense that they don't allow elbows, but this is the season finale, so they should have just... it's weird, because main events, it's the same sport, but the rules change. You're a 5-round fight rather than a 3-round fight, and that is almost effectively double the time. You're adding 10 minutes on when they only fight 15 minutes originally. So it's sort of the same, but I always think it's weird to fight under 2 sets of rules, as in with whatever weapons are legal or techniques. It just reminds me of when Strikeforce had Kawajiri versus Gilbert Melendez, and then at the last second they decided elbows were legal after never being legal up to that point, and then Gilbert Melendez elbowed the shit out of Kawajiri. They both knew that elbows were legal, but it is weird when you fight under one set of rules and then they immediately change them. So maybe they don't want to add elbows to this tournament final. But anyway, people were saying, Kayla's limited by the lack of elbows or whatever. But I don't think she was. She wasn't doing anything from the top of guard. Now, granted, an elbow is not as labour-intensive and does more damage physically, as in to the skin and stuff, than a punch or a hammer fist. But Larissa Pacheco was doing great work off her back, hammer fisting the shit, putting her feet on Kayla Harrison's hips and hammer fisting the shit out of her. If she were allowed to use elbows, Harrison would have been battered. She'd have been a bloody mess. The amount of hammer fists she landed, and there were tons when Kayla was in on a bad single leg along the fence, and Larissa Pacheco's having to hammer fist her in the side of the head, when everyone else in the UFC would just be leaning over the top and doing the Travis Brown Donkey Kong elbows. But I actually took some notes in this one because it was a pretty cool fight. I think probably because Larissa Pacheco put up a fight against someone who has just been dominating everyone so far. I mean, including Pacheco, but is it Pacheco? Whatever we're saying, I'm calling her Pacheco, like Ferdy Pacheco. But from the get-go, Kayla Harrison was looking for this overhand left. She was fighting southpaw, and then she would use that to tap the lead leg and throw the overhand, a la Alexander Shlemenko when he beat Gegard Mousasi. And then level change onto like a double leg and come up. But the problem was the left hand, Pacheco didn't respect it at all. So instead of bringing her right hand up to block it, she kept her right hand down, took the left hand on the face, and then had the underhook when Kayla ducked in. But it wasn't the end of the world because Kayla Harrison was actually really happy working off an overhook. So she'd take the overhook on that side, threatened to snap Pacheco down into a front headlock, and then hit an Osotogari, step round behind her and reap the leg out, as she was trying to stand up. It was really cool. She did it a couple of times. First round was the time it came off flawlessly, but she did it in like round 2 and 3 as well. It reminded me a lot of what one of my criticisms of Ronda Rousey always was, that she didn't have a lot of ways to get into the clinch. If you watch someone like, Islam Makhachev, Habib, anyone really good with their takedowns in MMA, there's a few different ways they can get in. And one of them is always going to be level change onto the hips, or level change and come up into the clinch. Both of those work. One of the basic things you'll see in boxing over and over again, I mean, one of Floyd Mayweather's key moves was to level change under his opponent's punches and step in and smother them chest to chest. He didn't shoot for double legs, he just came up into their chest. Actually, on the wrestling subreddit the other day, there was a great example of a American Greco-Roman wrestler who came from a freestyle background. I think they all come from freestyle backgrounds, but he was really catching people out by going to his knees, shooting, and coming up on the body. As long as you don't touch the legs, it's legal. I think is it called a high dive? But you do like a shot and come up on the trunk, the upper body. But yeah, that was always a big flaw of Ronda Rousey. She never level changed. Her way of getting into the clinch was always to go straight into the clinch, which made her very hittable. Kayla Harrison has at least, despite her judo background, incorporated level changes, single legs. I mean, she ran the pipe from the fence in this one. She's working with ATT, so they're not going to let her off with just doing the shit she already had. They're going to round out her game. I did, with her striking, I thought it was very funny. Just this fight really reminded me of the Ben Askren boxing stuff, where people, and Rogan has done this too, but like saying that because someone is an athlete in one sport, they'll be able to do other ones really easily. And there's a great deal to be said for the drive of someone. If you're getting to the highest levels of professional sport in one thing or another, you've probably got a good deal of drive and you'll be able to make yourself practice things. But the idea that because you wrestled for a long time, you'll be able to box, or because you did judo for a long time, you're going to be able to pick up the striking and strike well. No, not really. I mean, if you watch Kayla Harrison's kicks in this one, it's almost like she spent an entire career foot sweeping people in a way that really doesn't look like a kick because you get penalised for that. But she throws her kicks like she's trying to foot sweep people. She's like slapped them with the inside of her leg. Because for most of this fight, she was throwing like low kicks and high kicks and trying to get Pacheco to respect them. And Pacheco just didn't until she actually hit Pacheco in the neck with a high kick. And no matter how badly you throw a high kick, you're going to be able to hurt someone with it because it's the weight of your fucking leg is slapping against their head. I always remember BJ Penn versus Diego Sanchez. He threw the ugliest head kick in the world. And people were like, oh my God, BJ's learned to kick now. And you're like, no, he hasn't. He just threw his leg up. Actually had better head kicks against Matt Serra back when he was training them. But yes, Kayla actually hit her with a head kick in the neck in like round 5. And then Pacheco finally has to bring her hands up and Kayla runs a double leg to the fence. But the fence was actually a bit of a... stumped Kayla a bit, because that's one of the interesting things with Habib and Islam and how they've changed the meta of the game. A lot more judo throws along the fence, whether your back is to the fence and you're using an overhook and uchimatas and haragoshis or taiotoshis or whatever they are to create space and get out, or you're the guy with his back to the inside of the cage and you're putting your knees inside theirs and you're hitting hip throws and throwing them over your legs. Throwing off the cage has become a really important part of the game, and Kayla had a lot of trouble with that. When she got her down off the cage, it tended to be she tended to like pull her off the cage first and then try and hip trips, or she occasionally dragged her down with like a single leg. Obviously not a part of judo, the single leg takedown or running the pipe with the single leg, but she's picked it up. But as I said earlier, a lot of Pacheco's success came from fighting off level change takedowns along the fence. Kayla gets on a single leg, takes it down, Pacheco wraps the head, threatens the guillotine enough that Kayla Harrison has to roll to her back. Pacheco comes up on top into north-south, and then she used that, what we're always calling like catch wrestler side control. But you're seeing it more and more nowadays. I've been using it for a long time, but that's because I'm cool. No, but the one hand between the legs, because it slows the opponent from turning into you, makes it very hard. And I quite liked what Kayla did, because Kayla was trying to turn into her from side control and come up on the single. And with Pacheco holding her far leg away, it stopped her turning in. But when you've got one hand in the middle like that, the opponent can push your head in between their legs and throw up like a sloppy reverse triangle, which doesn't normally work, but does have to be respected. You can't just ignore it. And Kayla took her underhook out, pushed the head down, tried to throw up the sloppy triangle. Pacheco pulled her head back, and then Kayla dug the underhook again and turned to her knees. It was a really nice way of getting around that roadblock. Kayla's kicking got her caught on one leg in the second round. She threw a really sloppy kick from too close with no setup, and Pacheco blasted her with her right hand, got off some good punches, won the round. Round 3 was largely just Kayla getting on top in closed guard and not doing anything, and Pacheco was putting the feet on the hips and hammer fisting. I really liked that she put her foot on Kayla's hip, made her body straight from shoulders to the mat to hips, so she was like her body was making an upward slope, pushing Kayla back, and she's hammer fisting her. Great position to drop people onto elbows. That was Brian Ortega did that loads against Tavares, and if you remember when Michael Bisping sliced GSP open, that was an example of that. Guys who want to bury their head on your chest, you push them out with your feet and hands, and then you just drop them onto your elbows. Because you can't throw an elbow very hard from your back, but if their weight's falling onto the elbow, you can fuck them up. So she's throwing these hammer fists, sadly no elbows, but Kayla goes to push the foot that's on the hip down to step over it, and Pacheco just throws the triangle around it. It was a really nice attempt at a triangle. Couldn't finish it, got past off it immediately. Sort of the danger of the triangle if you're not great at finishing them, or if the opponent you've got is like a bit like a brick shithouse, it's got really wide shoulders, you can have real trouble. You probably can get your guard past. Kayla got on top, flattened her out in half, mounted a bit of a bad end to the round for Pacheco. Round 4 was Kayla landed that high kick, ran the double to the fence, and I really liked, she got Pacheco down, and Pacheco was holding the head, and I was going, oh, for fuck's sake. But Pacheco went to the opposite hip. She wasn't trying to drop on a guillotine. And Kenny Florian was saying if she wants to finish the guillotine, she's got to get on the opposite hip. But she kept the guillotine while having the other hand to the mat. And then she stood up, and as Kayla tried to pop her head out, the hand went straight from the guillotine grip to like an underhook. She threw the flag backwards and got the underhook as she was turning her back. It was really nice. And I was going, damn, Pacheco, you're not actually that bad. Even though women's lightweight is fucking terrible generally, and you've already lost to Kayla Harrison twice. And then Kayla came back in on a single, and she and this was sort of the theme. Kayla would enter bad takedowns in the later rounds. Pacheco would run to her back, get on her back, and then Kayla would turn back into her and be in guard, which is what we're always talking about with back position in MMA anyway. If you don't get on top of back position, if you're not like mounted on their back, there's a good chance that they turn back into you. Anthony Pettis made a career out of this. He'd give up his back and turning, like, watch the Anthony Pettis-Charles Oliveira fight, because Anthony Pettis does this about 8 times. But then Kayla came back in on the single leg again. She's just, like, desperately shooting doubles and singles along the fence. And Pacheco hit a really nice switch and got on her back again. So, yeah, it was a good close fight. Scrambly. I think Kayla not doing anything with her top position probably hurt her most. And Pacheco actually trying to do stuff even from bad positions, even though we always say, like, striking from the bottom is really more of an annoyance than anything. With the exception of elbows from guard and up kicks if they're legal. Those are the 2 big strikes from the bottom. But in this fight, like, Kayla got mount in round 4 and got outstruck while mounted because she was doing so little, and Pacheco was just throwing hammer fists up. So good for Pacheco. Really glad she won this, especially because everyone, especially me and everyone else, was writing her off because she'd lost twice. And the standard of women's lightweight is just so bad. I couldn't imagine anyone catching up to Kayla Harrison, who's genuinely quite talented. Lots of people slagging her off after the fight, being like, oh, her voice is deeper than her translators or whatever. She does have a very deep voice, and she is a jacked white girl. My only my only observation is that she looks a lot like Jeremy Ethier, or what's his name? Jerry Ethier, the fitness YouTuber. But no, I was really impressed with her. People saying like, oh, she'd lose to Jessica Andrade again or whatever. But I mean, Jessica Andrade is one of the best fighters in the world as a woman. There aren't many better than her. And Pacheco is enormous now, and it's been a long time. It's been since 2014. I think we can say that she's done some stuff on her own, and this is quite an impressive win. And good for her, because she wins $1 million, which is mad. Think about, people like Michelle Waterson fighting for $25K or whatever it is. And that's going to be the theme, actually, as we talk about the rest of these fights, because, I led with that because that's the one that people actually know about, the Kayla Harrison loss. But there were some decent fights on this, and my overall feeling on it was that a lot of these guys, I don't need to see them back in the UFC. There's a couple here who were cut by the UFC far too early. and they didn't go straight back to the UFC, or they were, their contract expired with the UFC, and the UFC didn't really offer them anything useful. So they went to the PFL, and they've done great things. They've won themselves $1 million. So the ones I want to talk about really are Rob Wilkinson, Olivier Aubin-Mercier, and Brendan Loughran. But we'll start with Rob Wilkinson because he had a very hard cut from the UFC. He came in short notice to save a fight with Sayar Bahadzada, whose name I can never say. You won't remember him, but if you do remember him, he was actually really dangerous at one point. And Wilco lost that by knockout. So he got 5 months until the next fight, and then he fights Israel Adesanya in Adesanya's debut in the UFC. And then they cut him. And he spent the pandemic year doing like boxing and kickboxing stuff, the odd Australian MMA fight. But then he finally gets a place in PFL this year. 4 fights, 4 finishes, none of them go past the second round. Do I think he's beating Israel Adesanya? No. Do I think he's going to become UFC middleweight champion? No. Do I think he was cut too early? Yes. He could be a fun part of the UFC, but why? He can win another $1 million here. He did amazing work this year, and this fight against Omari Akhmedov, who was also a UFC dropout, was actually really good. He was taller than Akhmedov, and he knew Akhmedov wanted to wrestle, so he backed him up to the fence and kept hitting with right uppercuts. It was fantastic. In terms of his striking technique, it was cool because you saw him trying to apply things that other fighters from the Antipodes, other oceanic fighters had success with, including Israel Adesanya against him. He was showing lots of hip feints, a classic Izzy move. If you watch that Wilkinson-Adesanya fight, there's moments where Adesanya moves him to the fence and he hip feints with his right hip, and then he hits him with a 1 and a 2 to the body, and it like folds Wilkinson in half. And Wilkinson was doing that here. It was really nice. Problem was when he was on defensive, he knew Akhmedov would come off the fence, and he'd try and uppercut him coming off the fence, and then he'd just sort of lean back and let Akhmedov fall short. Except he wasn't leaning back like Fiziev. He was just sort of letting it fall inches short of his face, but not in the way that encouraged you. I felt like if Akhmedov had got on the double jab earlier, he'd have had a lot more success. He only went to it in the second round after he was already bloodied up and his corner were asking for it. But when you got a guy who just wants to let you fall slightly short and stand in front of you and throw punches back, double jabbing is, of course, the way to go. But Wilkinson sort of mixed in his sort of like running flurries, his karate blitzes or whatever, and did great work. He was entertaining. He was hitting hard. He was landing his shots well. He wasn't getting hit much. What more can you ask for? And he made $1 million doing it. Fantastic. Which is like 10 million Australian dollars. Then he had a fight between Olivier Aubin-Mercier and Stevie Ray. Both guys who the UFC let their contracts lapse. Especially Aubin-Mercier, because he wasn't doing badly. He just was boring. And he continued to be fairly boring through this PFL run. And then he scored the knockout of his life to win the $1 million in this fight. So good for him. Sad for Stevie Ray because he's been doing really well outside the UFC. Battered Anthony Pettis twice. Then Aspen Ladd and Julia Budd had a fight that was unremarkable. And Aspen Ladd got a win, so good for her. The two heavyweights knocked each other out very quickly. Brendan Loughran went 4 rounds with Bubba Jenkins before knocking him out. Another guy who had I think 2 fights in the UFC way back in the day. And it's one of those things. I mean, Rob Wilkinson talked about it in his post-fight interview even. He said that he felt he'd pulled the trigger on going to the UFC too soon, especially because he came in at short notice to save that Sayar fight. And I think it's true. Some guys do. Some guys... It's interesting because Charles Oliveira went to the UFC in his early 20s as a super prospect, lost a load of fights, and then rebounded from them within the UFC. But it did involve taking a step down in competition for about 5-6 fights. And a lot of people don't get that luxury in the UFC. Whereas you got guys like Robbie Lawler, who was in the UFC very young, went away from the UFC, had some ups and downs, and then rebuilt himself just in time to come back to the UFC after Strikeforce folded. Career paths. They're not all the same, and the book is seldom written on someone until it is, until they retire. However, that being said, Marlon Moraes took a fight on this card. And, I've been complaining about this for ages because Marlon Moraes, I understand that he wants to get back in the ring, and I understand that losing sucks, and I understand that he loses half the money that he planned on having if he loses. But again, fair play to him because he took a bit more of a break this time. He took from March to November, which is good because previously, as I've been saying, he's getting back in the ring every 4, 5, 6 months after getting brutally knocked out every single time. And if you're getting back in the ring 5 months later, it means that you're back in the ring in training 4 months later, 3 months later. And I said this on Twitter after the fight, but he's got to be getting rocked in training because you can't prepare for a fight without some kind of meaningful sparring. And if he reacts as badly to every slight shot as he did in this one and as he has done in his last few, then his coaches know that he doesn't have a chin anymore. But then they don't get their money if he doesn't compete, which is cynical, but fair enough. And I hope that PFL offered him a lot of money guaranteed rather than him just trying for $1 million tournament next time around. But he was supposed to fight Shane Burgos. He fought Shane Moraes because Burgos had to pull out. Obviously, Marlon Moraes is a bantamweight, and he's going up to featherweight because they don't have a bantamweight division, even though he was their champion when they were the WSOF. The problem with that would be that Shane Burgos is fucking massive, so I'm very glad for him that he didn't meet Shane Burgos because he was having success wrestling in this fight, and trying to do that against Burgos probably would have been a nightmare. It's similar to the main event, Kayla Harrison. He was throwing left hooks or switching to southpaw and throwing left overhands and tapping the leg and getting the takedown off it, doing a little knee tap, overhand knee tap thing. But he didn't really do much from top position, and whenever Shane Moraes got to the fence, it looked like Marlon didn't know how to hold him down, and he just sort of let him get back up. And every time that Marlon stepped in the first round, you're going, damn, Marlon's blisteringly fast. But that's every single fight. First round, you go, damn, Marlon's blisteringly fast. And then you realise that every time he's stepping with his left hook or jab, he's eating a jab in return. And then in the third round, he got dropped by one. Or was that the second round? And then he got hit with an overhand and finished. Bit sad, but also kind of synchronistic that Shayman Moraes turned up in a significant fight, because I was just talking about him versus Zabit earlier this week in my quick Filthy Casuals guide I knocked together. Only other things on that card were Sadaboy Sai versus Delano Taylor in the final of the welterweight tournament. One of the most boring things I've ever watched. 5 rounds of going, it'll pick up any minute, and it never ever did. Really sad, because both of them had quite interesting fights to get here, so damn. And then Gleison Tebow had a boring decision loss to Magomed Kerimov, which was weird because Magomed Kerimov has also beaten both Sadaboy Sai and Delano Taylor in pretty recent history, but wasn't in the tournament final. I mean, that's just the way the tourneys work. That if you don't fight the full 4 times, you're not going to get enough points to win the tourney. It's kind of brutal, because just last week I was watching Fialho versus Muslim Salikov, and I'm watching Fialho get rocked with shots that weren't rocking him 5 fights ago, and they're saying, oh yeah, he's fought 5 times this year, isn't that awesome? And you're going, I'm not sure it is, to be honest. And then the other cool one was Natan Schultz versus Jeremy Stevens. I was talking about Natan Schultz back in the day, probably earlier this year actually. We were talking about people outside the UFC I'd like to see in the UFC, and Natan Schultz was one of the ones I talked about. He's sort of alternating interesting and boring fights. Quite an interesting pressure fighter, got a judo background, stands very upright with his hands high, and he uses teeps and fake teeps to step in quite a lot. And in this one, he did a fake teep, lifted his lead leg, stepped in, and then he threw a left hook about 50% of the way. Stevens covered up and he just dropped on a double leg. It was beautiful. And you just saw how good he is at getting to the arm triangle, because he attempted it about 5 times in this fight. And the whole fight was just Jeremy Stevens fighting off arm triangle attempts until finally one of them stuck in the second round. But absolutely smothering work from Natan Schultz. And Jeremy Stevens is not... His takedown defense isn't impenetrable, but he's difficult to take off his feet when he's not swinging wildly at you. To do it when he's aware of the takedown, quite impressive. However, this was at lightweight, and obviously Stevens is at his best at featherweight. So what else do we need to talk about? I suppose the UFC event the other night, not really a lot happened in it. What did I enjoy? Salikov versus Andre Fialho, I was just talking about. Again, Salikov at age 38 decided to get some fans. And there's these weirdos being like, oh, did you only see this fight? And you're like, shut the fuck up. I've seen all his boring-ass fights. And I'm a big fan of his. And I constantly go on about how many cool techniques he has in his boring-ass fights. But yeah, you saw the Salikov game plan is always fake the jab, never actually throw the jab. Fake the jab, backstep. And managed to do that decently for the first round or 2. And then he stunned Fialho at one point, And then Fialho just did exactly what he did against Jake Matthews. He started walking forwards and not reacting, not leading, not reacting, just sort of walking forwards with his hands up. And then Salikov took him apart. It was a bit sad, really. Fialho gets hit, and then he knows that he needs to press forward to stop the other guy hitting him, but he doesn't do anything with it. And then the real standout of the night was Jack Della Maddalena against Danny Roberts. I said, Danny Roberts, at least he's got a good 1-2 and he's a southpaw, so that should be interesting. Maybe Della Maddalena will fight more orthodox, and maybe Roberts will give him trouble with the 1-2. Maddalena fought the entire fight southpaw and 1-2'd the shit out of Danny Roberts. So much for that. Did a really nice one. He dipped under a jab, level changed at the knees, and then came up and threw the left straight across the top. Something I used to see Aaron Pryor do a lot back in the day. Level change and then come up with the straight. Because it's a weird movement. People expect you to level change and then throw wide over the top with an overhand or something like that. If you level change and then you come up and throw the right hand as you're rising. It's very tricky. Or left hand in this case, because it was a southpaw versus southpaw matchup. Lovely body shots, lovely flurries. Never looked like he was selling out. You know, even when he hurt him early, he was punching him in 3 or 4 punch combinations, but he was still clearly not going to tire himself out doing it, which you always appreciate. 3rd knockout in the row in the UFC for him, 4th under the Zuffa banner. Hopefully, new contract, fingers crossed, but still one of the most interesting welterweight prospects out there. One of the most interesting prospects in the UFC, in my humble opinion. And a slacky boy. Good weekend for slacky boys, because George Hardwick also won a fight, also by using awesome body shots. If you've not seen that, that was in Cage Warriors. He's got a really nice cross counter. He throws his right hand across the top of the opponent's jab, and then he comes in, he steps in off it, and he throws like he's just shanking someone with a little knife. He throws his left uppercut into the solar plexus with his elbow tight to his body. Really lovely shot. Kept doing that, and then he threw it a little bit wider to get around the elbow and hit the liver for the last shot of the fight. But he's got this little left uppercut to the body that's like a knife. Kind of like Henry Armstrong back in the day. He used to put his head on the guy and then just hit these little left shots to the solar plexus with his elbow flush to his body. Anything else good on that card? No. Nothing else I want to talk about, to be honest. Nchukwu versus Kutalaba was hilarious. Women's MMA in men's light heavyweight. Kutalaba gets him down with his Greco-Roman experience, passes the guard, sits in a scarf hold, loses the elbow, and Kennedy Nchukwu comes out on his back. Amazing. But I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm going to be back later in the week to do a boycast and talk about this upcoming Miami event. Honestly, I shat on it because of the main event, because I don't want to see old Wonder Boy lose to can't wrestle Kevin Holland. A fight that does nothing for anyone. Nothing for no one. But there's actually a surprising amount of fairly decent stuff hidden on that card, and the clue is that they're not at the Apex. If there's a real crowd that can boo, they actually put some effort in. So we'll be talking about that later in the week. If you want to get in on all the extra shit I do, podcast articles, game reviews, as I did on the last boycast, I reviewed God of War, and extra snark in your week, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to check out the Filthy Casuals Guide to Zabit Megamed Sharipov from earlier this week. That's on my YouTube. And it's not really just about Zabit, it's more about Zabit and the idea of maintaining pressure on top when the guy just wants to hold you. But anyway, that'll do it for today. I'm your boy, Jack Slack, and I'll catch you later in the week. Cheers. James Krause's unfolding saga, bless. Shout out to the MMA media for not covering that at all, by the way.